Alright, so today we're going to do chapter 4.3. We're going to write equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. So parallel lines, these are lines with the same slope that never intersect. And perpendicular lines, these are lines with opposite reciprocal slopes that intersect at a 90-degree angle. So let's talk about what an opposite reciprocal slope is. So you've heard me say the word reciprocal before, and obviously opposite as well. So opposite, that's when we're talking about the sign. So positive or negative. And then reciprocal, so if I wanted the reciprocal of 3/4, for example, it would be 4/3. I just want to switch the top and the bottom, and I want to make it the opposite. So if I was to write the opposite reciprocal or the negative reciprocal of 3/4, I would get -4/3. So I've just switched the numerator and denominator and switched it to the opposite sign. Okay? If I was to do the same thing for 3, I would get -1/3. So remember, whenever you have a whole number, it's like you have 3/1. So if I was to write the opposite of 3/1, I'd get 1/3. Or the reciprocal of 3/1, I'd get 1/3. And then if I were to make it the opposite, it would be -1/3. Okay? For number 3, I have -7/8. And if I were to write the reciprocal of that, I would get 8/7 negative. And then if I were to do the opposite reciprocal, I would get positive 8/7. Okay? And then for number 4, let's remember that if I have a whole number, it's always over 1. So if I have -1/1, then I want the opposite reciprocal. You should get just a +1 here. And then 0 is just kind of in its own little boat. The opposite reciprocal of 0 is still just going to be 0. Alright, so now we want to use slope to determine if the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So remember, slope is that equation that I gave you a while ago that you should have in your notes many times. So it's that m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So keep that in the back of your brain. And so now I'm looking at 1. So I want to use the slope, but I have to find the slope first in order to analyze if they are perpendicular, parallel, or neither. So I'm looking at line 1, and so my 2 points here, I'm given that line 1 has the points -1 and 3, and 4 and -2. So those are my 2 points for L1. My second line, I have -3, -1 is 1 point, and then my other point is 2, 4. So now I'm going to use that slope formula that I talked about just a second ago, that m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Remember, when we're finding slope, we're finding the change in y over the change in x. So for slope of L1, I'm going to set my equation up to be -2, because of this -2, minus 3 over 4 minus a -1, which is really the same thing as 4 plus 1. So I just wrote it as 4 plus 1. So now if I were to simplify this, I would get -5 over +5. And this can just simplify down to -1. So my slope here is -1. Okay, let's do our slope for L2. So I'm given the 2 points, and so now if I were to put this in my slope formula, I would get m of line 2 equals 4 minus -1. And so since I'm subtracting a negative, I just put 4 plus 1 because it's the same thing. And then I have 2 minus -3, and that is the same as 2 plus 3. So when I simplify that further, I get 5/5, which 5 divided by 5 is just 1. And so now I can fill in my little table underneath here, and I have the slope of L1 is -1, the slope of L2 is just 1, and so these are opposite reciprocal slopes. So we have perpendicular lines. Okay? Go ahead and see if you can try the next one on your own. So I would pause the video and see if you can try that one on your own. Find the slopes and analyze what types of lines you have here. All right, so hopefully you paused the video and you found that your 2 points for L1 is -3 and 3, and 6 and -3. Okay, then L2 you've got -6 and 0, and 6 and -7. Okay, if you were to find your slope for L1, you should get -3 minus 3 over 6 minus -3, which is the same thing as 6 plus 3, so you should get -6 over 9. So that is your slope here. And yes, you can simplify that further, which hopefully you know that you can divide both by 3. And so you can simplify that a little bit further to be -2 over 3. Okay, and now we want to find the slope of line 2. So hopefully you got the slope of line 2 is -7 minus 0 over 6 minus 0. Oops. Or 6 minus -6, so you should get 6 plus 6, which is just 12. Okay, so when you simplify, you should get -7 over 12. And we can't simplify that any further, so that's just that. And so let's fill this in. So we have -6 over 9, which we also know is the same as -2 over 3. So I prefer simplifying because we want to reduce as much as we can whenever possible. And then our slope for line 2 is just going to be -7 over 12. So this doesn't really tell us anything. They're not opposite reciprocals, they're not the same slope, and so they are neither. Okay? So now in 3 and 4, we're just given 4 points, and we want to find the slope of both lines and then figure out what type of lines we have. So it's kind of similar to above, just without the graphs. So let's find the slope of AB first. So we have -2, 3, and 2, 6. So I'm going to plug that into my equation, and so I'm finding the slope of AB here. And so you should get 6 minus 3 over 2 minus -2, which is 2 plus 2. So you should get 3/4 here. Okay? And then your second one, you have -1, 0, and then 3, 3. So 3 minus 0 on the top, and then 3 minus -1, which is really the same thing as 3 plus 1, so you should get 3/4 again. So if you were to put this in your table, you get 3/4 here, 3/4 there. We know that since they have the same slopes here, they are parallel. All right, so for number 4, what I want you to do is pause the video again, see if you can find the slopes of AB and CD, and see what you get. All right, so hopefully you paused the video and you found that the slope of AB, when you set it up in your equation, you get 4 minus 2 over 5 minus 0, so you get 2/5 here. For CD, you should get 3 minus 8 over 3 minus 1, so you should get -5/2. When you fill this in your table, you get 2/5 over, or 2/5 and -5/2. So these are opposite reciprocals here, so they are perpendicular. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to take an equation of a line and write a parallel line to it and a perpendicular line to it. So we're given a linear equation in a certain point, and you can create another equation that passes through this point, and it is either going to be parallel or perpendicular to the given line. So parallel lines, again, these have the same slopes. Perpendicular lines, or did I say perpendicular? Parallel lines have the same slopes. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. So for the first one, we want to find a line that is parallel to y equals negative 4x plus 5. So we're going to graph each line to begin with as well. So let's start by graphing that, y equals negative 4x plus 5. And so we're going to go ahead and graph this in green. And so I go up to 5 on the y-axis because that's my y-intercept. And then my slope here is negative 4 over 1. So my rise is negative 4, so I'm going down 4 over 1. Down 4 over 1, down 4 over 1. And then I can draw my line. Okay? And now what I want to do is find a line that passes through the point negative 2, 7. That's parallel to the line y equals negative 4x plus 5. So if it's parallel, then we have to have the same slope, which is m equals negative 4. So we have m equals negative 4, and now we just want to use that point. And so we're going to use point slope formula here. And so hopefully you still have this in your notes. So if we were to write this out, we should get y minus 7 equals negative 4, and then in parentheses, x minus 2. Okay? And let's simplify this a little bit further, because I know if I'm subtracting a negative, I'm really just adding. So I can still have y minus 7 equals negative 4, and then times x plus 2. So now I want to distribute in that negative 4 and get y minus 7 equals negative 4x minus 8. And now we add 7 to both sides and get negative 4x minus 1. So now in blue, I'm going to go ahead and graph this. So my y-intercept here is negative 1. So I'm starting at negative 1 on the y-axis. And then I have the same slope here. So I'm going down 4 over 1. Down 4 over 1. I'm going to go up 4 and over to the left just to put 1 point above where I started. And then I'm going to draw my line. Alright, so now what I want you to do is again pause the video and see if you can find the equation of the line that passes through the point 4, 3 and is perpendicular to the line y equals 2x minus 4. So graph y equals 2x minus 4 first, and then think about what your slope would be if it is perpendicular. Alright, so hopefully you pause the video and you graph this line first, and so your y-intercept is negative 4, and now your slope is 2 over 1. So up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, draw your line, and that's your first equation of the line. Okay? And so now if you're using your slope from your first equation and you want to find something that's perpendicular, your slope currently is m equals 2, and now you want to find opposite reciprocals. So the slope that you should have used is m equals negative 1/2. Okay? And so now if we're using this point 3 or 4, 3, we're going to plug this into point slope formula. So we get y minus 3 equals negative 1/2 times x minus 4. And if we were to simplify this a little bit further, you should get y minus 3 equals negative 1/2 times x plus negative 1/2 times negative 4 over 1. And I just put the negative 4 over 1 just to make it a fraction, because I know that when I multiply fractions, I multiply straight across, so they need to be in fractional form. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply that, and so when I do, I get y minus 3 equals negative 1/2 x plus 4/2. And I know what 4 divided by 2 is, so I can simplify this to be y minus 3 equals negative 1/2 x plus 2. Alright, so now I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and when I do that, I get negative 1/2 x plus 5. And now I'm going to graph this. My intercept is at 5, so I'm going to go here, and then down 1 over 2. Down 1 over 2, graph my line, and it does look to be perpendicular, so I know I did it correctly.